The desert air shimmered with heat as Major Sarah Chen walked across the tarmac toward her A-10 Thunderbolt II. The massive twin engines and distinctive straight wings of the Warthog cast long shadows in the late afternoon sun at Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan. Sarah had been flying the A-10 for 8 years, but today felt different. Today, she would either prove herself to the most elite warriors in the American military or become the subject of their jokes for years to come. The morning briefing had started like any other close air support mission. Colonel Martinez had outlined the operation while Sarah sipped her third cup of coffee, fighting off the exhaustion that came with back-to-back sorties in support of ground troops. But when the SEAL team leader, Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison, spoke up from the back of the briefing room, everything changed. Morrison was a legend among Special Operations Forces. 22 years in the Navy, 15 of those with SEAL Team 6, and more successful missions than most people had hot dinners. His weathered face and quiet confidence commanded respect from everyone in the room, including the Air Force pilots who usually kept their distance from the Navy's finest. The mission itself seemed straightforward enough. A Taliban commander had been tracked to a compound in the Kunar province, nestled deep in a valley surrounded by towering peaks. Intelligence indicated he would be meeting with bomb makers and foreign fighters, making it a high-value target. The SEALs would insert via helicopter, establish overwatch positions, and call in precision strikes to eliminate the threat. But the geography presented unique challenges. The compound sat in a narrow valley, barely 300 meters wide at its narrowest point. Steep mountain walls rose over 2,000 feet on either side, creating a natural fortress that had frustrated military planners for months. Previous attempts to hit targets in the area had failed because aircraft couldn't achieve the necessary angles for accurate strikes without exposing themselves to anti-aircraft fire from the ridgelines. Sarah had studied the terrain maps extensively. The valley ran roughly east to west, with the compound positioned near the western end. To effectively engage the target, an aircraft would need to fly directly down the valley floor, maintaining an altitude low enough to avoid detection by surface-to-air missiles, but high enough to clear the obstacles and terrain features scattered throughout the narrow passage. It was Morrison who first brought up the altitude requirements. His team had conducted reconnaissance in the area before, and they knew the challenges intimately. "We need someone who can get down in the weeds," he said, his gravelly voice carrying across the briefing room. "I'm talking about flying at 50 feet above ground level, maybe less. The walls of that valley are lined with fighting positions and anti-aircraft guns. Anything higher than 100 feet is going to get chewed up." Several pilots shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Flying at 50 feet above ground level in mountainous terrain was dangerous enough in clear weather with perfect visibility. Doing it in a combat zone, with hostile forces actively trying to shoot you down, bordered on suicidal. The margin for error was essentially zero. One moment of inattention, one small miscalculation, and you would become part of the landscape permanently. Captain Rodriguez, one of the F-16 pilots, spoke first. "Chief, with all due respect, the Fighting Falcon isn't designed for that kind of low-level work in confined spaces. We can get down low, but in a valley that narrow, our turn radius is too wide. We'd have to pull up and bank out before we could properly engage the target." Morrison nodded, his expression neutral. He had expected this response. High-performance fighters like the F-16 were built for speed and agility, but they needed room to maneuver. In the confined space of the Kunar Valley, they would be severely limited in their tactical options. Captain Williams from the Apache Squadron was equally pessimistic. "My birds could theoretically make it work," she said, "but the flight time to target would expose us to ground fire for too long. Those peaks are crawling with Taliban fighters, and they've got everything from AK-47s to Russian-made shoulder-fired missiles. An Apache moving slow enough to navigate that valley safely would be a sitting duck." The room fell silent as Morrison's gaze swept across the assembled aviators. Sarah could see the frustration building behind his eyes. This was a high-value target, the kind of opportunity that could significantly disrupt Taliban operations in the region. But without effective air support, his team would be walking into a heavily defended position with limited backup options. Finally, Morrison's attention settled on Sarah. She was the only A-10 pilot in the briefing, and everyone knew the Warthog's reputation for low and slow operations. The A-10 had been specifically designed for close air support in contested environments, built to take punishment and keep flying. Its straight wings and powerful engines gave it exceptional low-speed handling characteristics, while its armored cockpit and redundant systems provided protection that other aircraft couldn't match. "What about you, Major?" Morrison asked. "Can the Hog make it work?" Sarah had been expecting the question, but it still sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system. She had flown low-level missions before, but nothing quite like what Morrison was describing. 50 feet above ground level in a narrow mountain valley was pushing the A-10's capabilities to their absolute limits. It was technically possible, but it would require precision flying skills that few pilots possessed. She stood up slowly, walking to the large-scale map displayed on the wall. Her finger traced the route through the valley, calculating distances, turn radii, and approach angles. The compound was positioned in such a way that a straight-line approach from the east would provide the best firing solution, but it would also mean flying directly into the heart of the Taliban defensive positions. "The A-10 can handle the altitude requirements," Sarah said finally, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Our stall speed is low enough to maintain control at 50 feet, and the straight wing configuration gives us better handling characteristics in confined spaces than swept-wing aircraft. The titanium bathtub around the cockpit will provide protection against small arms fire, and our engines are separated and mounted high, which reduces the risk of catastrophic damage from ground-based weapons." Morrison nodded approvingly, but several of the other pilots looked skeptical. Captain Stevens, a veteran F-15 pilot with over 3,000 flight hours, shook his head slowly. "Sarah, I've got a lot of respect for what you do in that airplane, but what the chief is talking about goes beyond normal low-level operations. Flying at 50 feet in a mountain valley isn't just about aircraft capabilities, it's about human limitations too. The visual cues are different. The margin for error is non-existent. And if something goes wrong, there's no time to recover." Sarah appreciated Stevens's concern, but she had spent years training for exactly these kinds of scenarios. The A-10 community prided itself on operating in environments where other aircraft couldn't survive. Low-level penetration, close air support in contested airspace, and precision strikes in confined areas were core mission requirements that every Warthog pilot trained for extensively. But Morrison wasn't finished. He walked to the front of the room, his combat boots clicking on the polished floor. "I've been doing this for over 2 decades, he said, his voice carrying the authority of countless successful missions. "I've worked with every type of aircraft in the military inventory, and I've never seen anyone fly lower than 100 feet in terrain like this and live to tell about it. The laws of physics don't care how good a pilot you are. In that valley, at that altitude, with those obstacles, it simply can't be done safely." The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Sarah could feel every eye in the room focused on her, waiting to see how she would respond. This wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about proving that she belonged in the same conversation with the military's most elite warriors. Morrison wasn't questioning her aircraft's capabilities. He was questioning her skills as a pilot. Sarah had faced similar challenges before. As one of only a few female A-10 pilots, she had constantly been forced to prove herself in a male-dominated profession. Early in her career, some colleagues had questioned whether women had the physical strength to handle the A-10's controls under combat stress, or the mental toughness to make life-and-death decisions in the heat of battle. She had answered those questions through performance, not words. "Chief Morrison," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm, I understand your concerns and I respect your experience. But the A-10 was built for exactly this kind of mission. We train for low-level operations in contested environments because that's where our ground troops need us most. I'm not saying it will be easy, and I'm not saying it's without risk, but it can be done. Morrison studied her for a long moment, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. The SEAL community had its own culture of quiet confidence, where actions spoke louder than words, and respect was earned through demonstrated competence under pressure. He had heard plenty of pilots make bold claims in briefing rooms, only to fall short when the bullets started flying. Major Chen, Morrison said slowly, I've seen pilots with 20 years of experience get disoriented and crash trying to fly at 200 feet in mountain terrain. What makes you think you can do something that's never been done before? The question struck at the heart of what made Sarah different from many of her peers. She didn't rely solely on natural talent or years of experience. Instead, she approached every flight with the methodical preparation of an engineer and the focused intensity of a surgeon. She studied terrain maps until she could visualize every ridge and valley, practiced emergency procedures until they became muscle memory, and analyzed weather patterns with the thoroughness of a meteorologist. Because I've been preparing for this kind of mission my entire career, Sarah replied. I've flown low-level routes through the Grand Canyon, navigated mountain valleys in Colorado at night, and conducted close air support in urban environments where the margin for error was measured in feet, not miles. The A-10 and I are ready for this. Colonel Martinez, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke up. Chief Morrison, Major Chen has one of the best safety records in the squadron with over 800 combat hours in the A-10. She's also completed advanced low-level training at Nellis and has instructor pilot qualifications. If anyone can make this work, it's her. But Morrison remained unconvinced. He had earned his reputation by being cautious when it mattered and aggressive when the situation demanded it. The lives of his team members depended on making the right tactical decisions, and he wasn't about to risk everything on an untested theory, regardless of how confident the pilot seemed. I appreciate the vote of confidence, Colonel, Morrison said, but my team's lives are on the line here. I need more than credentials and training records. I need to know that this pilot can actually deliver what she's promising. The room fell silent again, as everyone processed Morrison's statement. Sarah realized that this was about more than just the mission. Morrison was testing her in front of her peers, challenging her to back up her words with concrete proof of her abilities. It was a test that many pilots had failed, and failure here would mean more than just embarrassment. It could impact her credibility for years to come. Sarah walked back to the map, studying the terrain features one more time. The valley was indeed narrow and treacherous, filled with obstacles that could destroy an aircraft in seconds. But she could see the route clearly in her mind, visualizing each turn and altitude change required to successfully navigate the passage while maintaining effective weapons parameters. Chief, Sarah said, turning to face Morrison directly, what if I could demonstrate the low-level flying capabilities before the actual mission? There's a similar valley complex about 50 miles north of here that we use for training. Same general terrain features, same altitude challenges, but without the hostile forces. I could show you exactly what the A-10 can do. Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly, considering the proposal. A demonstration flight would provide concrete evidence of Sarah's capabilities while minimizing risk to his team. If she could successfully navigate a similar valley at the required altitude, it would go a long way toward proving that the actual mission was feasible. What kind of demonstration? Morrison asked. Sarah had anticipated this question and already formulated her answer. A full-profile flight through the training valley at 50 feet above ground level, simulating the same approach angles and weapons parameters we would use on the actual mission. You and your team could observe from a safe distance and evaluate whether my flying meets your operational requirements. The proposal was bold and risky. Demonstration flights were typically conducted at safe altitudes with generous margins for error. What Sarah was suggesting was essentially a full-scale rehearsal of one of the most dangerous flying operations imaginable, with an audience of the military's most elite warriors watching her every move. Captain Rodriguez whistled softly under his breath. "Sarah, that's putting your reputation on the line in a big way. If something goes wrong during the demo, or if you can't maintain the required parameters, it's going to be hard to recover from that." Sarah nodded, understanding the risks involved. But she also understood that this was an opportunity to prove herself to people who could significantly impact her career and future mission assignments. SEALs had influence throughout the special operations community, and their endorsement could open doors that might otherwise remain closed. "I understand the stakes," Sarah said, "but I also understand what the A-10 can do and what I can do as a pilot. This aircraft was designed for exactly these kinds of missions, and I've been training for them my entire career. I'm ready to prove it." Morrison looked around the room, gauging the reactions of the other military personnel present. The Air Force pilots seemed split between admiration for Sarah's confidence and concern for her safety. The Army officers appeared intrigued by the possibility of finally having effective air support for operations in difficult terrain. Colonel Martinez looked supportive but cautious, clearly weighing the potential benefits against the obvious risks. Finally, Morrison made his decision. "All right, Major Chen, you've got your demonstration flight. Tomorrow morning, 0800 hours, at the Training Valley Complex. My team and I will be positioned on the northern ridge with observation equipment. You'll have one pass through the valley at 50 feet above ground level, simulating a combat approach with full weapons parameters. If you can prove that this can be done safely and effectively, then we'll incorporate it into the mission plan." Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with nervous excitement. She had gotten what she asked for, but now she had to deliver on her promises. The demonstration flight would be one of the most challenging and dangerous flying operations of her career, with her professional reputation hanging in the balance. "Roger that, Chief," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I'll be ready." As the briefing broke up and personnel began filing out of the room, Sarah remained behind to study the maps one more time. She traced the route through the training valley with her finger, visualizing every turn and altitude change. The margin for error would be minimal, and she would need to fly with a level of precision that few pilots ever achieved. Colonel Martinez approached her as she continued studying the terrain features. "Sarah, you don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Morrison's standards are impossibly high, and he's testing you in ways that he's never tested male pilots. You've got nothing to prove to anyone." Sarah appreciated her commander's concern, but she had made her decision. "Sir, with respect, I do have something to prove. Not to Morrison and not to the other pilots, but to myself. I've been flying the A-10 for 8 years, and I've always known that someday I would face a mission that would test every skill I've learned. Tomorrow is that day." Martinez nodded slowly, understanding the mindset that drove exceptional aviators to push beyond normal limitations. "Just remember, Sarah, the mission is important, but it's not worth your life. If the conditions aren't right, or if something doesn't feel safe, abort the demonstration. There will be other opportunities." As Sarah walked out of the briefing room and headed toward the flight line, she felt the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. Tomorrow's demonstration would be about more than just proving she could fly low in mountain terrain. It would be about proving that she belonged among the military's most elite aviators, and that the A-10 could deliver capabilities that no other aircraft possessed. The desert sunset painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple as Sarah reached her aircraft. She ran her hand along the titanium armor that surrounded the cockpit, feeling the solid protection that had saved countless A-10 pilots over the years. Tomorrow, she would need every advantage that the Warthog could provide, along with every skill she had developed as a pilot. Standing beneath her aircraft, Sarah began the mental preparation that would continue long into the night. She visualized the demonstration flight from start to finish, rehearsing every control input and emergency procedure. The SEALs claimed that no one could fly that low in mountain terrain and survive. Tomorrow, she would prove them wrong. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced the pre-dawn darkness at 0500 hours, but Major Sarah Chen was already awake. She had been lying in her bunk for the past hour, mentally rehearsing every aspect of the upcoming demonstration flight. Today would either validate years of training and preparation or end her reputation as one of the Air Force's most skilled close air support pilots. Sarah's pre-flight routine was methodical and precise, honed through hundreds of combat sorties. She began with a thorough weather briefing, studying wind patterns, visibility conditions, and atmospheric pressure readings. The morning forecast showed clear skies with light winds from the northwest, ideal conditions for low-level flying in mountainous terrain. Temperature would be rising throughout the morning. But the density-altitude calculations showed acceptable parameters for the A-10's performance requirements. The intelligence briefing confirmed that the Training Valley complex remained clear of any hostile activity. The area had been used for military training exercises for over a decade, with well-established safety protocols and emergency response procedures. Recovery helicopters would be positioned at both ends of the valley, ready to respond immediately if something went wrong. At 0630 hours, Sarah made her way to the aircraft maintenance hangar where her A-10 waited. Staff Sergeant Williams, her dedicated crew chief, had been working on the aircraft since 0400, conducting the most thorough pre-flight inspection of his career. Every system had been tested and retested, every fluid level checked and rechecked. The twin General Electric TF-34 engines had been run up and examined with microscopic attention to detail. "She's ready, Major," Williams reported, wiping his hands on a clean rag. "All systems green, full fuel load, and I've personally inspected every inch of this bird. The 30mm cannon is loaded with practice rounds, and the pylons are configured with inert ordnance for realistic weight distribution." Sarah nodded her appreciation. The crew chiefs were the unsung heroes of military aviation, working long hours in difficult conditions to ensure that aircraft were mission-ready when pilots needed them most. Williams had been maintaining A-10s for 12 years, and his attention to detail had kept dozens of pilots alive during combat operations. The walk-around inspection revealed an aircraft in perfect condition. Sarah checked control surface movement, tire pressure, and external equipment mounting points. She paid special attention to the engine intakes, ensuring they were clear of any foreign objects that could cause catastrophic damage during flight operations. The A-10's engines were mounted high and aft, which provided protection from ground fire, but made them susceptible to ingestion of debris during low-level operations. At 0700 hours, Sarah began the internal pre-flight procedures. She settled into the familiar confines of the armored cockpit, adjusting her helmet and checking the connections for her oxygen mask and communication systems. The titanium bathtub that surrounded her had been designed to protect against armor-piercing rounds up to 23mm caliber. But its real value was the confidence it gave pilots to operate in heavily contested environments. The engine start sequence proceeded without complications. The twin turbofans spooled up with their characteristic whine, settling into the steady rumble that every A-10 pilot found reassuring. Sarah monitored engine parameters carefully, watching oil pressure, turbine temperature, and fuel flow readings. Everything indicated normal operation within specified limits. Radio communications with the control tower confirmed clearance for departure at 0730 hours. The flight plan called for a direct route to the Training Valley complex, approximately 50 miles northwest of Bagram Airfield. Flight time would be roughly 20 minutes, giving Sarah opportunity to acclimate to the aircraft's handling characteristics and review her mental preparation one final time. As Sarah taxied toward the active runway, she could see vehicles moving along the perimeter road, heading toward observation positions in the mountains. Master Chief Morrison and his SEAL team were already en route to their vantage point on the northern ridge, where they would have an unobstructed view of the entire valley floor. Other personnel from the base had also requested permission to observe the demonstration, turning it into something approaching a public spectacle. The takeoff was smooth and routine, with the heavily loaded A-10 climbing steadily through the clear morning air. Sarah maintained a conservative climb profile, allowing the engines to operate at moderate power settings while she familiarized herself with the aircraft's current weight and balance characteristics. The practice ordnance added several thousand pounds to the normal configuration, slightly affecting control response and performance parameters. During the 20-minute transit to the training valley, Sarah reviewed her mental checklist one more time. The demonstration would require a single pass through the valley at 50 feet above ground level, maintaining a speed of approximately 300 knots while simulating combat approach parameters. She would enter the valley from the east, navigate through the narrowest section at minimum altitude, and exit to the west while demonstrating weapons delivery capabilities. The challenge lay not just in maintaining precise altitude control, but in doing so while maneuvering through terrain that left virtually no margin for error. The valley walls rose over 1,500 feet on either side, creating a natural corridor less than 400 meters wide at its narrowest point. Rock outcroppings, ridgelines, and scattered boulders created additional obstacles that had to be avoided while maintaining flight parameters that would be acceptable for actual combat operations. At 07:48 hours, Sarah established radio contact with Morrison's observation team. Overwatch, this is Hog 1, approaching the valley complex from the southeast, ready to begin demonstration in 2 minutes. Morrison's voice crackled through the radio with professional clarity. Hog 1, Overwatch has you in sight. Valley is clear, winds are calm, visibility unlimited. You are cleared for demonstration pass at your discretion. Sarah took a deep breath and began her descent toward the valley entrance. From 8,000 feet above sea level, the terrain below looked deceptively peaceful. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky landscape, highlighting the rugged beauty of the Afghan mountains. But as Sarah continued her descent, the true scale and difficulty of the challenge became apparent. At 1,000 feet above the valley floor, Sarah could see the narrow entrance that would serve as her gateway into the demonstration route. The opening between the mountain walls was barely wide enough for comfortable maneuvering, and it would only get narrower as she progressed deeper into the valley. She reduced power and adjusted her descent rate, preparing for the transition to low-level flight. The moment Sarah dropped below the rim of the valley walls, the entire character of the flight changed dramatically. Visual references shifted from distant horizons to immediate terrain features rushing past at tremendous speed. The sensation of speed increased exponentially as rocky walls and scattered boulders created a blur of motion on either side of the aircraft. Sarah's training and experience took over as she settled into the rhythm of extreme, low-level flying. Her scan pattern shifted to focus on immediate terrain features rather than distant navigation points. Control inputs became more frequent and precise, with constant adjustments needed to maintain proper clearance from obstacles while staying within the acceptable altitude band. At 50 feet above ground level, the A-10 thundered through the valley like a predator stalking its prey. The twin engines echoed off the canyon walls, creating a thunderous roar that could be heard for miles in every direction. Sarah maintained precise altitude control through a combination of visual references and radar altimeter readings, never allowing the aircraft to deviate more than 10 feet from her target altitude. The first major challenge came at the 3-minute mark, when the valley floor suddenly rose by nearly 100 feet due to an ancient rock slide. Sarah saw the obstacle ahead and smoothly increased power while pulling back on the stick, maintaining her 50-foot clearance while the aircraft climbed to match the terrain. The maneuver required split-second timing and precise control inputs. executed so smoothly that observers might have thought it was effortless. Morrison's voice came through the radio with grudging respect. Hog 1. That was some impressive flying. Maintaining altitude reference through that terrain change looked flawless from our position. But Sarah was already focused on the next challenge. Ahead lay the narrowest section of the valley, where the walls closed to less than 300 meters apart. At her current speed, she would have less than 4 seconds to make any necessary corrections once she entered the confined space. There would be no room for error and no opportunity for a second attempt. As the A-10 entered the narrow section, Sarah felt the aircraft respond to the ground effect created by flying so close to the valley floor. The wing's lift characteristics changed slightly, requiring constant adjustments to maintain proper altitude. Meanwhile, the proximity of the canyon walls created turbulence and wind shear effects that tried to push the aircraft off course. Sarah's hands moved continuously on the controls, making dozens of small corrections every minute. Her eyes scanned constantly between the terrain ahead, her altitude indicators, and the rapidly approaching canyon walls. The margin for error had shrunk to mere feet, with any significant mistake likely to result in impact with terrain or loss of aircraft control. The technical challenge was compounded by the need to demonstrate weapons delivery capabilities. Sarah activated her targeting systems and began the process of acquiring simulated targets on the valley floor. The heads-up display showed range and bearing information to predetermined target coordinates, while her hands continued making the control inputs necessary to maintain safe flight parameters. At the 4-minute mark, Sarah initiated a simulated gun run on a target painted on the valley floor. The 30mm GAU-8 cannon remained silent, loaded only with practice ammunition, but all systems indicated proper target acquisition and firing solution. The maneuver required a slight banking turn while maintaining altitude, adding another layer of complexity to an already demanding flying situation. Morrison's team watched in amazement as the A-10 thundered through the narrow valley, maintaining perfect altitude control while demonstrating combat capabilities that they had believed impossible. The aircraft moved with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, never deviating from its intended path despite the challenging terrain and complex maneuvering requirements. "Unbelievable," muttered one of the SEAL snipers, watching through high-powered optics. "She's flying that thing like it's on rails. I've never seen anything like it." Sarah's concentration remained absolute as she approached the most technically difficult section of the demonstration. A series of scattered boulders and rock outcroppings created an obstacle course that required constant maneuvering while maintaining minimum altitude. Each obstacle demanded split-second decision-making and precise control inputs, executed at speeds that left no time for second-guessing. The A-10 wove through the boulder field like a slalom skier navigating gates, never losing altitude or speed despite the complex maneuvering required. Sarah's years of training in similar terrain had prepared her for exactly this kind of challenge, and her confidence in the aircraft's capabilities allowed her to push the envelope in ways that few pilots would dare attempt. As she cleared the final obstacle in the narrow section, Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The most difficult part of the demonstration was behind her, and everything had proceeded exactly according to plan. But the mission wasn't complete until she had successfully exited the valley and returned to safe altitude. The valley began to widen as Sarah approached the western exit, but new challenges emerged. The terrain sloped upward toward a narrow pass between two peaks, requiring a climb while maintaining visual clearance from the rising ground. Sarah smoothly increased power and began a gradual climb, keeping the aircraft's nose pointed toward the exit while monitoring her altitude above the rising terrain. At the 6-minute mark, Sarah cleared the western rim of the valley and immediately began a rapid climb to safe altitude. The demonstration was complete, and every objective had been achieved with textbook precision. She had successfully navigated the entire valley complex at 50 feet above ground level, maintained combat-ready parameters throughout the flight, and demonstrated weapons delivery capabilities that exceeded even her own expectations. Morrison's voice came through the radio with unmistakable respect. Hog 1. That was the most impressive display of low-level flying I've ever witnessed. You've just redefined what we thought was possible in terrain like this. Sarah keyed her microphone, trying to keep the satisfaction out of her voice. Overwatch Hog 1. The A-10 was built for exactly this kind of mission. We're ready to take it to the next level whenever you need us. As Sarah climbed back to cruise altitude and set course for Bagram Airfield, she reflected on what had just transpired. The demonstration had been technically successful beyond all expectations, but more importantly, it had proven that the A-10 could provide capabilities that no other aircraft could match. The combination of the aircraft's unique design characteristics and specialized pilot training had created opportunities that didn't exist anywhere else in the military inventory. The flight back to base gave Sarah time to decompress from the intense concentration required during the valley transit. Her hands were slightly shaky from the adrenaline, and she could feel the fatigue that always followed high-stress flying operations. But underneath the physical exhaustion was a deep sense of satisfaction and professional accomplishment. Radio calls from the base indicated that word of the successful demonstration was already spreading throughout the military community. Other pilots were requesting details about the flight parameters and techniques used, while mission planners were already discussing how similar capabilities could be incorporated into future operations. As Sarah entered the traffic pattern at Bagram Airfield, she could see small groups of personnel gathered along the flight line, waiting to hear first-hand accounts of the demonstration. The landing was routine and uneventful, a stark contrast to the technical complexity of the preceding 40 minutes. Staff Sergeant Williams was waiting beside the aircraft as Sarah shut down the engines and completed her post-flight procedures. His expression showed the pride and satisfaction that came from seeing his aircraft perform flawlessly under the most demanding conditions imaginable. "How did she handle, Major?" Williams asked as Sarah climbed down from the cockpit. "Like a dream, Sergeant," Sarah replied, removing her helmet and running a hand through her sweat-dampened hair. "Every system performed exactly as advertised. You and your team should be proud of the job you did preparing this aircraft." As Sarah walked across the tarmac toward the debriefing building, she could see Morrison and his team approaching in their vehicles, returning from the observation site. The Master Chief's expression had changed dramatically from the skepticism he had shown during the previous day's briefing. Now there was respect, admiration, and perhaps most importantly, complete confidence in her abilities. The demonstration flight had accomplished its objectives and more. Sarah had proven that the A-10 could operate effectively in terrain that other aircraft couldn't survive, and that her own flying skills were equal to the most demanding challenges the military could present. But beyond the technical accomplishments, she had earned something far more valuable: the respect and trust of the special operations community. The debriefing room at Bagram Airfield buzzed with quiet energy as personnel filed in for what would become one of the most significant tactical discussions of the deployment. Major Sarah Chen sat at the front table, still wearing her flight suit, while Master Chief Morrison and his SEAL team occupied chairs around the perimeter. The atmosphere had changed completely from the skepticism and doubt that had dominated the previous day's meeting. Morrison stood up first, his weathered face showing an expression that few people had ever seen: genuine amazement mixed with professional respect. As someone who had worked with military aviators for over 2 decades, he understood the magnitude of what he had just witnessed. The demonstration flight had exceeded every expectation and redefined his understanding of what was possible in modern military aviation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison began, his gravelly voice carrying across the room, "what we observed this morning changes everything we thought we knew about close air support in mountainous terrain. Major Chen has just demonstrated capabilities that open up tactical options we've never had before. Sarah remained seated, trying to project calm professionalism despite the adrenaline that still coursed through her system. The demonstration flight had been technically demanding beyond anything she had previously attempted, but it had also been personally satisfying in ways that few professional achievements could match. She had proven herself to people whose opinions carried weight throughout the special operations community. Colonel Martinez nodded toward the large-scale map displayed on the wall. Chief Morrison, based on what you observed this morning, how does this change our approach to the Kunar Province mission? Morrison walked to the map and pointed to the narrow valley where the Taliban commander was believed to be hiding. Previously, we were looking at a ground assault with limited air support options. The terrain made conventional close air support nearly impossible, and we were prepared to accept higher casualties among our team members. But Major Chen has just proven that the A-10 can provide precision fire support in terrain where no other aircraft can operate effectively. The SEAL sniper, who had observed the demonstration through high-powered optics, spoke up from his position near the back of the room. Sir, the precision and control we witnessed this morning was unlike anything I've seen in 15 years of special operations. The Major maintained exact altitude parameters while maneuvering through terrain that would challenge a helicopter pilot. In a fixed-wing aircraft moving at 300 knots, it was simply extraordinary. Sarah appreciated the professional recognition, but she also understood that the real test would come during actual combat operations. Demonstration flights under controlled conditions were one thing. Delivering the same performance while being shot at by determined enemies was something entirely different. The Taliban fighters in the Kunar province were experienced and well-equipped, with access to sophisticated weapons systems provided by foreign supporters. Captain Williams from the Apache Squadron had been unusually quiet during the discussion, but finally spoke her thoughts. Major Chen, I have to admit I was wrong yesterday when I questioned whether this could work. What you accomplished this morning proves that the A-10 has capabilities that none of us fully understood. The question now is whether you can replicate that performance under combat conditions. It was a fair question that went to the heart of military aviation. Training flights and combat operations existed in completely different environments, with stress levels, decision-making requirements, and consequence management that couldn't be replicated in practice scenarios. Sarah had hundreds of combat hours in the A-10, but nothing quite like what the Kunar mission would demand. Captain Williams raises an important point, Sarah replied thoughtfully. Combat operations always introduce variables that can't be predicted or controlled, but the fundamentals remain the same. Precise aircraft control, thorough mission planning, and confidence in your equipment and training. The A-10 is specifically designed for operations in contested environments, and the skills demonstrated this morning translate directly to combat situations. Morrison pulled out a detailed topographical map of the target area and spread it across the table. Let's talk specifics about how this would work. The compound is located here, approximately 2 kilometers from the valley entrance. Intelligence indicates guard positions on the ridge lines and anti-aircraft weapons positioned to cover traditional approach routes, but they're not expecting an attack from inside the valley itself. Sarah studied the map carefully, tracing potential approach routes with her finger. The tactical situation was actually more complex than the demonstration valley, with additional terrain features and man-made obstacles that would complicate the flying requirements. But the fundamental principles remained the same. Low altitude to avoid radar detection, precise navigation to avoid terrain obstacles, and accurate weapons delivery to neutralize targets without causing collateral damage. The compound has several buildings clustered around a central courtyard, Sarah observed. Target identification will be critical to ensure we're engaging the right structures. What kind of intelligence do we have about which buildings contain the high-value targets? Morrison's team had been conducting surveillance on the compound for several days, using both satellite imagery and ground-based observation posts. The intelligence picture was detailed and current, showing guard rotations, vehicle movements, and patterns of activity that indicated where the Taliban commander was most likely to be located. "Our primary target is the main building on the eastern side of the compound," Morrison explained, pointing to the structure on the satellite photograph. "Intelligence indicates this is where the command meetings take place. Secondary targets include the weapons storage facility and the vehicle maintenance area. We need precision strikes that eliminate the targets without creating debris that could harm civilian populations in the surrounding valley." Sarah nodded, understanding the complexity of rules of engagement in asymmetric warfare. The A-10's 30mm cannon was capable of extremely precise fire, but the pilot had to maintain exact parameters to ensure accuracy while avoiding unintended damage. Flying at 50 feet above ground level while engaging ground targets required skills that few pilots possessed, even within the A-10 community. The mission planning session continued for over 2 hours, with detailed discussions about timing, approach routes, communication procedures, and emergency contingencies. Morrison's team would insert via helicopter before dawn, establish observation positions on the surrounding ridgelines, and provide real-time target information as the situation developed on the ground. Sarah would approach the target area at high altitude, maintaining normal flight patterns until the final approach phase. Then she would descend rapidly into the valley and conduct the attack run at minimum altitude, using the terrain to mask her approach from enemy radar and anti-aircraft systems. The entire low-level portion of the mission would last less than 10 minutes, but those 10 minutes would require flying skills at the absolute pinnacle of military aviation. As the planning session concluded, Morrison approached Sarah privately. His expression showed a combination of respect and concern that reflected the gravity of what they were about to attempt. "Major, I owe you an apology for my skepticism yesterday. What you demonstrated this morning was extraordinary flying, and it gives my team tactical options we've never had before." Sarah appreciated the gesture, understanding how difficult it could be for seasoned professionals to acknowledge when their assumptions had been proven wrong. "Chief, your skepticism was entirely justified based on your experience. What we're attempting hasn't been done before because few aircraft have the capability to operate effectively in that environment. The A-10 was specifically designed for this kind of mission, but it still requires everything to come together perfectly." Morrison nodded gravely. "That's exactly what concerns me. You've proven that it can be done under controlled conditions, but combat operations have a way of introducing complications that no amount of planning can anticipate. My team will be depending on your support in a situation where failure isn't an option." The weight of responsibility was something Sarah had carried throughout her military career, but it felt particularly heavy as the mission approached. The lives of Morrison's team members would depend on her ability to deliver precision fire support under the most challenging conditions imaginable. There would be no second chances and no margin for error. 3 days later, at 0400 hours, Sarah began her pre-flight procedures for the Kunar province mission. The weather conditions were ideal, with clear skies and light winds that would provide optimal flying conditions for the low-level approach. Intelligence updates indicated that the Taliban commander was indeed present at the compound, along with several other high-value targets. Morrison's team had inserted successfully during the night and established observation positions without detection. Their radio reports confirmed that the compound was occupied and that the targets were present as anticipated. Anti-aircraft positions had been identified and marked for avoidance during the attack run. The flight to the target area proceeded normally, with Sarah maintaining standard altitude and flight patterns to avoid alerting enemy forces to the impending attack. Radio communications with Morrison's team provided real-time updates on ground conditions and target status. Everything indicated that the mission was proceeding according to plan. At 0530 hours, Sarah received the final clearance to begin her attack approach. She reduced altitude rapidly and entered the valley system from the east, immediately transitioning to the low-level flying techniques that had proven successful during the demonstration flight. The terrain was even more challenging than anticipated, with additional obstacles that required constant maneuvering to maintain safe clearance. But the hours of preparation and training paid off, as Sarah navigated through the valley with the same precision she had demonstrated days earlier. The A-10 thundered through the narrow passages at 50 feet above ground level, avoiding detection by enemy radar while maintaining perfect position for the upcoming weapons engagement. The compound appeared ahead exactly as described in the intelligence briefings. Sarah could see vehicles in the courtyard and guard positions on the surrounding buildings. Her targeting systems quickly acquired the designated structures, and within seconds, she was ready to engage with surgical precision that would eliminate the targets while minimizing collateral damage. The 30mm cannon fired in controlled bursts, each round precisely placed to achieve maximum effect against the designated targets. The main command building disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris, while secondary explosions indicated that weapons storage areas had been successfully engaged. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds, but it achieved complete destruction of the high-value targets. Sarah immediately initiated a rapid climb out of the valley, clearing the ridgelines and returning to safe altitude within minutes of completing the attack. Radio communications confirmed that all primary objectives had been achieved and that Morrison's team was safely extracting from their observation positions. "Hog 1, outstanding work!" Morrison's voice came through the radio with unmistakable satisfaction. "Target destruction was complete and precise. You've just eliminated one of the most wanted Taliban commanders in the region." The flight back to Bagram Airfield gave Sarah time to reflect on what had been accomplished. The mission had validated years of training and development in low-level attack capabilities, proving that the A-10 could operate effectively in terrain where other aircraft simply couldn't survive. More importantly, it had demonstrated that properly trained pilots could deliver precision fire support under the most demanding conditions imaginable. The post-mission debriefing revealed the full impact of the successful operation. Intelligence analysts confirmed that the Taliban commander and several other high-value targets had been eliminated, significantly disrupting enemy operations throughout the region. The precision of the attack had avoided any civilian casualties, while the complete destruction of the compound sent a clear message about American military capabilities. Morrison's formal mission report included unprecedented praise for Sarah's flying skills and tactical effectiveness. His recommendation resulted in immediate recognition from special operations commanders throughout the region, with requests for similar support from other SEAL and Special Forces units operating in challenging terrain. But the personal impact on Sarah was equally significant. She had proven herself to the most elite warriors in the American military, earning respect and recognition that would influence her career for years to come. More importantly, she had pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible in military aviation, opening up new tactical options for ground forces operating in difficult environments. Colonel Martinez called Sarah into his office a week after the mission to discuss her future assignments. The success in the Kunar province had generated interest from senior military leaders who were looking for pilots with demonstrated capabilities in extreme low-level operations. "Sarah, I've received inquiries from several commands about your availability for special assignments," Martinez explained. "The techniques you've developed and proven are being studied by tactical air support specialists throughout the military. There's interest in having you help develop training programs and operational procedures for other A-10 pilots." The recognition was professionally satisfying, but Sarah's primary concern remained with the mission at hand. "Sir, I appreciate the interest from other commands, but my focus is on supporting the troops in this area of operations. There are still missions that require the capabilities we've proven here." Martinez smiled, understanding the mindset that drove exceptional military aviators. "That's exactly why everyone wants to work with you, Sarah. You've proven that the impossible is just another mission requirement that can be met with proper planning and execution. As Sarah left the commander's office and walked across the base toward her aircraft, she reflected on how much had changed since that skeptical briefing room discussion just days earlier. The SEALs who had claimed that no one could fly that low in mountain terrain had become her strongest advocates, recommending her capabilities to special operations units throughout the theater. The demonstration flight had been about more than just proving technical capabilities. It had been about earning the respect of people whose opinions mattered, and proving that excellence in military aviation came from the combination of advanced equipment and superior training. Sarah had shown that the A-10 Thunderbolt II, in the hands of a skilled pilot, could accomplish missions that redefined the boundaries of what was possible in modern warfare. Standing beneath her aircraft in the Afghan sunshine, Sarah understood that she had become part of a legacy that stretched back through generations of military aviators who had pushed beyond accepted limitations to achieve the impossible. The SEALs had been wrong about what could be accomplished with low-level flying in mountain terrain, and she had been the pilot to prove it. But more importantly, she had shown that with proper preparation, training, and determination, any challenge could be overcome. The lessons learned from the Kunar province mission would influence close air support tactics for years to come, providing ground forces with capabilities they had never possessed before. And Sarah Chen, the pilot who had proven that the impossible was just another day at the office, had earned her place among the most respected aviators in military history.